Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba, back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a black empowerment initiative where we believe we can gain a competitive advantage by always betting on black. Back with another video. But before we get started, make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button. And you know about the HBO special. That means help your boy out. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of summer. So make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. So we're going to jump right in. Another video where we're discussing July 4th. As you know, many of us call it the 4th of July. So we're going to be discussing, having a conversation, and the title of the conversation is going to be a rhetorical question. That is, what does July 4th mean to foundation of black Americans and American descendants of slaves? So the FBA ADOS, what does July 4th mean to them? But as we all know, I believe in the wisdom of our great ancestor, Fannie Lou Hamer, who of course was chairperson of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, who taught us to never forget where you come from and always praise the bridges that carried us over. And one of the bridges that I, of course, want to carry today is, and highlight, is one Fredrick Douglass. So many of us know Frederick Douglass as the 19th century social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and of course, statesman, who miraculously and famously, notoriously, I can even say, freed himself from slavery and also taught himself how to read and write, became one of the greatest abolitionist movement leaders of the 19th century. I also believe that Frederick Douglass is noteworthy for crossing the proverbial ideological pond and working with Martin Delany, who of course was a black nationalist and a proto-Pan-Africanist on that North Star newspaper in Pittsburgh. So we want to give a shout out to the great ancestor, Martin Delany, as well, because we know Martin Delany is considered the father, of course, of black nationalism. But I bring up Frederick Douglass because Frederick Douglass famously on July 5th, 1852, and we can even say notoriously on July 5th, 1852, gave a speech to then President Millard Fillmore, who was the 13th president of the United States. And if many people are unaware, Millard Fillmore was actually the last president of the United States who was not affiliated or a member of the Democratic or Republican parties. So that's just a historical tidbit there. I believe he was a member of the Whig Party. But Millard Fillmore and members of Congress, friends, distinguished guests, and he gave this this speech, What is July 4th to the American Slave, in Rochester, New York. So many of you, if you haven't been to upstate New York, Rochester actually has the University of Rochester, Rochester University. And at Rochester University, they actually have a center, the Fredrick Douglass Center at the University of Rochester. So if you're ever in Rochester, make sure you check that out. But in that speech, Frederick Douglass, and I'm going to read an excerpt from his speech, he states that what to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is subjected to. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy alliance, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sound of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants' brass-fronted impudence, your shout of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. It's a brief excerpt from Frederick Douglass's infamous speech, What is July 4th to the American slave, of course, which was given in Rochester, New York on July 5th, 1852. And so I asked a rhetorical question, what is, of course, July 4th to foundational black Americans and members of ADOS? And before answering that question, I think it's something that I think is important that we kind of reference or discuss what is Stockholm Syndrome. I was having a conversation with my daughter and I asked her what Stockholm Syndrome was. She said she didn't know. So actually I didn't tell her, I made her look it up. And so for those of you who maybe are unaware, Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological condition. Many psychologists and psychiatrists argue that it's a negative coping mechanism in which individuals who are being abused, harmed, enslaved, etc., tend to view their captors, their oppressors, their abusers in a favorable light, and oftentimes even adopt the ideas and values of those who are doing them harm. I would argue that when we look at the ADOS, FBA community, the same is being said, and that there's really an issue of Stockholm Syndrome going on. And many may ask, How so? And I'm going to explain. So glad that you asked. First and foremost, I believe that many individuals who are part of that community view themselves as more American than African. We know many years ago, decades ago, many moons ago, as our elders would say, Malcolm X taught us that one of the biggest secrets and strengths of the Black Muslim movement was what a push on, was the emphasis on African ties, African culture, African history, heritage, so on and so forth. And Malcolm X said that, we're here every day and we're being duped by the man and his wife telling us that we're an American, we're an American, we're an American. He said, but the reality is we've never enjoyed the fruits of Americanism. We've only enjoyed the thorns and the thistles, right? And so they argue that not only from a legal standpoint are we treated as Americans, but even especially from a ethnic or racial standpoint, we should always be proud of our history, heritage, and culture, because as Marcus Garvey once taught us many years ago, he taught us that even under the most severe conditions, we should never hate or dislike ourselves. I think that's very important. Last but not least, also in the FBA ADOS, I find there's actually a belief in American exceptionalism, right? That America, first world nation, is inherently different than all of the nations of the world. And that may be true in some respects, but I believe America is exceptional when it comes to hypocrisy. America is exceptional when it comes to warmongering. America is exceptional when it comes to meddling in the affairs of other sovereign nations. America is exceptional when it comes to denying other people's the very rights that they say that they believe in. That's what I believe America is exceptional in. And so America, I also think, is exceptional in terms of the human rights abuses, colonialism, imperialism, and of course, white supremacy, because as we know, America is the greatest superpower in the world. And we know that Black people, we played a role in that taking place because we provide the labor, the brick and mortar that built America into the economic and military superpower that it is today. Also, when we talk about this FBA ADOS movement, what is July 4th to the Negro, to the American slave, Oftentimes we find people state that our brothers and sisters on the continent, our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, throughout the death and decadence of the Western diaspora, are running from white supremacy rather than fighting it. And I think this is, once again, pure hypocrisy, right? I think this is a surface level argument, but when you go a couple steps deeper, what you're going to find is African Americans, if you want to use the term running, we ran as well. We know that there was the Great Migration, two Great Migrations, was African Americans left the South, fled the South, ran from the South, right, and went north in search of not only better lives, freedom from state-sponsored terrorism, but also, of course, higher wages and better employment, better housing as well. So if you want to say we ran rather than staying and fighting, that would be an issue, right? Secondly, we know that African Americans left for Haiti after the Civil War. We know that Paul Kufi was the first to repatriate to the continent during, I believe, the 18th century. We had Martin Delany, who led expeditions of African Americans going back home. Then, of course, there was Marcus Garvey. Then we know about African Americans going to Ghana. We know the Queen Mother, one of our greatest ancestors, who actually came back to America to work with Malcolm X. I'm thinking of, her name is missing me right now. She was a poet. Lord have mercy. Wanda Cageberg sings. Let me see if I can find her book very quickly. I can't find it, but she, she was in Ghana. I can't recall her name, but she, of course, was in Ghana, right? She was a member of an African American community in Ghana. We had African Americans who fled to, if you want to use that term, to Tanzania. We could look up Patrice O'Neill, who was, of course, there was even a documentary on him entitled A Panther in Africa, where he talked about his time in Kansas City as the leader of the Black Panther Party, then, of course, fleeing to, of course, Tanzania to escape prosecution. We know we have brothers who even went to Ethiopia as well and settled and are still there. So this Maya Angelou, Queen Mother Maya Angelou was the actual name. She actually went to Ghana and was living in Ghana. It came back at the behest of Malcolm X to help him with the Organization of African American Unity. So I think these are a number of issues we have to look at. Also, I think when we talk about what is July 4th to Foundation of Black Americans, what is the July 4th to ADOS, right? Because we know, unfortunately, that there's a move to this push in American exceptionalism. There's a belief in where we're more American than we are African, right? More American than anything, which of course is extremely problematic because now you're taking on the ideology of the oppressor. And we know in this country, American means white, right? So to think white, to act white, to view the world from a white lens, I think is extremely problematic. And this really goes to what W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about over 100 years ago when he coined the term double consciousness. looking at the world through the eyes of someone else. And we never want to have a myopic view about what our goals, what our aspirations are, and what we need to do to restore ourselves to our traditional greatness. With that being said, also, I think of Howard Zinn's work. We know the radical historian Howard Zinn, who wrote the groundbreaking book, which was titled, The People's History of America from 1492 to the present. He talks about how history is typically taught from the governmental perspective that promotes this concept of national glory. But when you actually study the history from the perspective of the people that actually lived it, it gives a completely different story. And we know oftentimes there's three sides to a story. You have one side, another person's side, and then of course the truth. But in that, he talks about a number of issues that America has engaged in that, of course, is in contradiction to the actual what the values America, of course, promotes and extols. And that is, of course, we talk about what took place in Haiti. We could talk about Iran-Contra. We could talk about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, of Thomas Sankara. We could talk about the banana wars that took place in the Caribbean, right? We could talk about what took place in Cuba with the Bay of Pigs. So this whole idea of freedom, as Fredrick Douglass once stated, is brass-fronted impudence, in my opinion. And then, of course, last but not least, when we talk about what is July 4th to the Negro, and we talk about FBA and ADOS, I know a lot of times people would argue that when Black immigrants come to America, they don't engage in radical political action the way many African Americans do, or some African Americans do, because we know there's never 100% of anyone who is engaged in any type of political action or discourse, because we know we're not a monolithic group. But what we tend to find is that's a very surface level argument that's being made. And once again, it's taking on this kind of xenophobic American exceptionalism type of perspective. The reality is most immigrants, when they come to a country, they're kind of going to lay low, right? Kind of like the Snoop Dogg song, you want to lay low. And the reality is because they're here by privilege, not by right. Martin Delany even argued that the way African Americans are treated in this country, we were actual denizens, not citizens. And a denizen is in a country based on privilege, not by right. And of course, this is something that is actually true legally from the standpoint of Black immigrants that immigrate from, of course, the continent, and then, of course, the Caribbean and even South America. And so as a result, what tends to happen is if you do engage in radical political action, you will be deported. This is what happened, I believe, to, we know this is what happened with Martin Delany. So we have to understand that, you know, these issues are complex, they're nuanced, varied, and of course they're 2-3 times levels deep, when we have to get away from having surface level conversations about what's taking on in the Black community and how to solve these problems. But once again, what is July 4th to the Negro? What is July 4th to Foundation of Black Americans and American descendants of slaves? Great conversation. Let's get the conversation started below. Share your comments, and you all know what to do. Until next time, make sure you always bet on Black. Peace.